Today we have attorney Rebecca Steinhauser from Advocates for Basic Legal Equality here. She will be providing a presentation on the Social Security benefit for adults, including SSI and SSDI. We're so grateful to ABLE and their continued partnership with Kinship Caregivers Connect and providing this helpful information to kinship caregivers.
Thanks, Angela, for the kind introduction. And we always enjoy speaking to the kinship caregiver group. You guys are a great group, and I know you have a lot of responsibility on your head and probably a lot of information that you'd like to know about. So I was mentioning to Angela that we are happy to come speak on other topics as long as we have the expertise. So if you are interested, then reach out to Angela and let her know, and we'll see if we can arrange presentations on other topics. Just briefly about our organization, we are Advocates for Basic Legal Equality. We are a nonprofit law firm, and we provide services in a variety of different areas, including housing, education, healthcare and public benefits, and immigration. And we have a medical legal partnership for children, and that's within our group and within the healthcare and public benefits group. And so we take referrals from groups like kinship caregivers or from medical providers for children who have issues, legal issues, because we know that children's health is impacted by a variety of things, and legal issues often can negatively impact children's health. And so we take legal referrals with the hopes that helping with that legal issue will improve a child's health. So today I'm going to speak about SSI and the SSDI program a little bit. Next slide. So that you've probably heard of quote unquote disability, people often call it, and that's a very broad term. Social Security actually has two different disability programs. The first program is called Social Security Disability Insurance. It's called SSDI for short. You might hear some people call it just SSD. So it provides disability benefits for people who are insured. And that's, you get insured by working and earning credits through the Social Security system. You can earn credits for yourself if you become disabled, or for those credits can also provide benefits to certain individuals on your record. So next slide. So insured status. For somebody over age 31, you're going to need 20 quarters of coverage out of the last 40 quarters of coverage before you become disabled. So in simpler terms, that just means that you have to have 5 recent years of work. And so your coverage can lapse after five years of being unemployed. And you need fewer quarters the younger you are. So people that are 24 and under actually only need about 6 quarters to be fully insured. And children can qualify on the earnings record of a parent. So, and the word child can be deceptive. Sometimes we think of a child as being under age 18. Actually, a disabled adult child is anybody who's disabled before age 22, who's not married, whose parent has enough work quarters to qualify for disability, and whose parent is disabled, retired, or deceased. So you can be in your 40s, 50s, 60s and be a disabled adult child as long as you have a parent who paid into the system and you meet all of those other criteria. So your benefit amount will be 50% of a parent's check amount if that parent's still living. It'll be 75% of the check amount if the parent is deceased. So this is something to watch out for, because I do see kids that are getting SSI, kids or older adults who are getting SSI. And SSI is capped at no more than $967 in 2025. But sometimes if a parent retires or goes on disability or dies, then that child may be entitled to benefits if we can show that they were disabled before age 22, and we can get them a much larger benefit amount than they have been receiving. Next slide. And so dependent child benefits are a little bit different. Those are for children that are under 18 or full-time students up to 19. And so a child can get benefits on their parent's record if they are the child, and that can include stepkids or grandkids if you have custody of them, who are dependent on you, not married, and again, need to be under 18 or a full-time student up to 19. SSI is a program, this has been around for a little over 50 years, that was created to provide payments to individuals, including kids under age 18 who are disabled and have limited income and resources. So when I say limited income and resources, I mean just that. These are very low income standards, so no more than $967 for a single person. And there's a little bit higher of an amount if you are married, so it's about $1,450 for a married couple. And the resource limit, as you can see, very low, $2,000. Slightly higher resource limit if a child on SSI has two parents in the home, it's about $3,000, but still not very high resource limit. So this is for people who are very, very low income, and that benefit amount can vary depending on your living situation. So when they're looking at income, they look at unearned income. So that could be you have retirement, a pension, maybe SSDI. Earned income, they look at your employment, and they also look at what they call in-kind support and maintenance. So that's financial support that you're getting from other people. And what is not in-kind support? So if you're getting financial assistance not related to food or shelter, and I do believe they've changed the shelter rules, so I don't think they're applying that anymore, which is good. That's a very recent change. But they do look at, is somebody helping you, buying you food? They don't look at your SNAP payments. They don't look at loans that you have to repay. So if you're getting college loans, they're not looking at that. They're not looking at infrequent or irregular income. So if grandma gives you some money every Christmas, they're not really looking at that either. Next slide, really looking at regular income. So if you're living in someone else's household and really getting benefit of, okay, I'm sorry, it's food that's not counted now. If you're living in somebody else's household and getting benefit of shelter, you're not paying rent there. They're going to reduce your payment. And so it goes down by a third, and that's what they call the VTR for short. And then when you're getting assistance with just shelter, then they're going to, or other things, they're going to look at presumed maximum value, and they're not going to count it as any more than $342.33 this year, but they may count it as less. So if you're only getting $100 of assistance, that's all they'll count. But it will reduce the amount of your SSI. I always tell people, it makes sense if somebody's in your household and they're on SSI that they should be paying towards their shelter, because if they're not, they're just going to reduce the payment. And this way, at least you're keeping the money within the household. So we do work with people to make sure they understand that. Deeming is a term that they use with Social Security. So they count, some people are responsible for supporting you. So if you're a parent with a child under 18, they are going to count the parent's income when they're looking at whether you qualify for SSI. If you're married, they're going to count your spouse's income. Or if you have if you have contracted to say, I'm sponsoring this person who's come from overseas as a refugee and I'm paying their bills, that money is counted as available to the SSI recipient. So there's all kinds of income sources that can reduce your SSI. Now, resources, what they count as resources can vary, but they're mainly looking at what do you have that can reduce your, or that can be liquidated. So they're looking at things like, and we can go to the next slide, Jen. There, and you can go past that as well. They're looking at cash. Do you have bank accounts, like a savings or checking? They're looking at real property. Do you have extra homes? Not the home you live in. They don't count that. But if you happen to own an extra home, they're going to look at that. They look at stocks and bonds. They look at certain value, cash value in life insurance. They're going to look at whether you have more than one car. So as I said, there are resources that are excluded. So the house where you live and the land attached to it is going to be excluded, even if it's a really nice house. All the personal goods that you have inside the home, they're not going to count those. If your life insurance has a face value of $1,500 or less, they don't count that. Burial plots, they will exclude. They will exclude money in a past plan. So that's a special plan that people can do through Social Security when there's a purpose for some kind of vocational purpose, like returning to school or going to work or starting a business. For SSI recipients, you can exclude up to $100,000 in a stable account. So these are real nice features of the system now that just came around about 7 or 8 years ago. So stable accounts can shelter assets from SSI and from Medicaid. For those individuals that became disabled before age 26, that age limit is going up to age 46 in next year. So keep that in mind. It's a great savings tool and anybody can contribute to the account. So parent, grandparent, the person themselves on SSI or anybody else can contribute to these accounts. And there are certain other trusts that can shelter assets as well. We don't normally prepare those trusts, but there are organizations that can do those trusts. Any property that you use in your trade or your business is also going to be excluded. And so when we look at the non-medical eligibility, you can contrast SSI and SSDI. So SSI is for aged, blind, or disabled people. SSDI is for, again, people with disabilities. They could have all those disabilities. They could be blind or disabled, but they do need to have paid into the system or they have a relative that's paid into the system. And SSI, you need to be low income, and you can see how low income that is. $967 for a single person, $1,450 for a couple. SSDI, you have to be insured, pay into the system. SSI, resources have to be low. No more than 2,000 or 3,000 for a married couple. You also have to be a U.S. resident for at least 30 days on SSI. That's another weird thing about SSI that we don't have with SSDI. With SSDI, there are no income or asset limits, but I should say that they do look at earned income. So they're not looking at unearned income, but if you are working, they are looking at that, and that can reduce or even terminate your SSDI. And then SSI, you have to be a citizen or a legal qualified alien. There are a few exceptions to that citizenship requirement. So if you were lawfully residing here in the U.S. on the magical date of August 22nd, 1996. We still see a few people that meet this exception. Then you're still going to qualify for SSI. If you're a permanent resident and you have 40 or more work quarters, if you're active duty military or a veteran or a spouse of a veteran. And there's an exception. We use this quite a bit with refugees. We work with a lot of the refugee populations and to some extent with trafficking survivors and human trafficking survivors that may have been trafficked from overseas. And there is an exception for this SSI requirement that goes for 7 years. So usually within that time, we try to assist those folks with getting citizenship. Next slide. So there's other factors that can terminate SSI. So if you've been incarcerated for more than 30 days, your SSI will suspend. It won't terminate. You can get it back if you get out within a year. But if you're there for more than 12 months, it's going to terminate. Or if you're out of the country for more than 30 days, it will be suspended, but you can restart those benefits after 30 days, after you come back. If you're hospitalized or you have a nursing stay for more than 30 days, your benefit will reduce to $30 monthly. There is an exception, which I learned about this years ago as a young attorney when somebody contacted me. They were in the nursing home. They needed to pay their rent on the outside, and they'd been there about 80 days at the time, and they were getting discharged. So I was quickly able to get them access to this exception where we could pay her back rent so she could be discharged and go back to her apartment without owing any rent or being in danger of an eviction. But this only lasts you can only do that for 90 days. So if you're going to be there longer than 90 days, they're going to stop those SSI payments. Next slide. So the cash benefits vary. So with SSI, it won't be any more than $967. It could be less than that, depending on your categorical status, whether you're living with someone who's supporting you, whether you have any other kind of income. With SSDI, your benefit's going to depend on your work history or your relative's work and wage history. So if somebody's worked in a professional job for 20 years, they're obviously going to have a higher payment than would somebody who worked as a waitress for the past 20 years. So that cash payment is very dependent on what you paid in. And again, if your parent paid in and you qualify by virtue of them being disabled, retired, deceased, and you were under 22 when your disability started, you may be able to get a higher payment. And that would be through the SSDI system. And a weird rule with SSDI is that there's a 5-month waiting period. So even when we get somebody qualified for benefits, unless that onset date is 5 months previous, they're not going to get those benefits right away. Whereas with SSI, payments can start right away. Next slide. So Medicaid benefits, there are different medical coverage available under both programs. So with SSI, you're automatically going to qualify for Medicaid. You could still qualify for some forms of Medicaid when you're on disability, but they're looking at your income. There are many different types of Medicaid, so it can be confusing. Some types are very low income. There are some that have higher income limits, and so it's best to ask when you can't just look at a chart these days and know whether you qualify for Medicaid, because there are so many different programs and so many exceptions depending on who you are and what type of Medicaid you want. Next slide. And so to one good example that's been around for, this has probably been around for about 16 years, but it's still not very well known, even at Job and Family Services. And that's the Medicaid buy-in for workers with disabilities. And so you have to be disabled on this program. There is an age limit. You have to be under 65. You must be working, but there's no limit on how many hours. I've been able to get people coverage if they were working 2 or 3 hours a week. And the great thing is this has a much higher income limit. There's a asset limit of, I think it's about $15,000, so a higher asset limit than many Medicaid programs. And it's a great way to get people on Medicaid if they can work just a tiny bit. The SRS program is about 8 years old now, also not real well known. It started out as a program solely for people with mental health issues, and then it expanded to include a long list of chronic conditions. And so there's a long list. If you have one of those conditions, you might be able to get on this program. The income limit for the program is about $2,400. There's no asset limit. So this is another way we can get folks on Medicaid a lot easier than through our traditional programs. And I mentioned stable accounts a little bit earlier. So those are a great savings tool. The application's online. You can exempt $100,000 from SSI. You can exempt up to $541,000 from SNAP or Medicaid or any of the Medicare savings programs. The money's not taxable. You can contribute up to $18,000. And then if you're working, you can contribute up to that 14,580 limit. And as I mentioned, you have to be disabled. So, and that could be, you can show that if you're currently qualified to get SSI or SSDI, or if you have a diagnosis form that's signed off by a physician. As I mentioned, the age limit's going up to 46 next January. And anybody in your life can contribute money to these plans. So I have a lot of people doing these, and it's been a real godsend for a lot of people. Next slide. So the good thing about these stable plans is that unlike a lot of trusts, so I mentioned there are other types of trusts, pooled trusts and things that we don't do. We refer people for assistance with preparing those trusts, but most of those trusts will not allow you to use the money to pay for necessaries. And we know that's what our folks want to use the money for. Those other trusts will allow you to pay for the kind of fun things of life. But the great thing about stable plans is that they'll do all of that. So they'll allow you to pay for anything that helps maintain or improve health, independence, or quality of life of the individual. And you can make an argument that just about anything fits in there. So it could be necessaries like housing, utilities, college expenses, transportation, employment, health, assistive technology, and yeah, all the fun things of life. So vacations, movies, concerts, all that kind of good stuff. Just remember to keep all your receipts and make sure that it's going to be a qualified expense. Otherwise, it's going to be subject to tax and 10% penalty. So somebody asked me, well, what would be an unqualifying expense? Well, if you use money from the trust to go purchase 10 cases of beer, probably arguably that's not going to be a qualified expense. But other than that, unless it's something really out there like that, you can make an argument most things are going to be qualifying expenses. So I just kind of contrasted the difference between stable accounts and special needs accounts. here. But the other downside to the stable account is that it is generally subject to estate recovery, meaning after you die, the state could come in if you're receiving Medicaid and take any of that money in that trust. But if you're constantly using it and spending it, and there's not much left in there at the time you die, not something to worry about. Whereas a lot of other trusts, the purpose is that you're creating them so that they are not subject to estate recovery, although some of the pooled trusts still are. So these are the major differences between those accounts. I personally think the stable accounts give a lot more flexibility to the people that I'm working with, and their relatives that just want to make sure they have what they need. So that is, in a nutshell, the Social Security, Disability, and SSI program. Did anybody, I'm sure there were some questions in the chat. So
this was all very helpful information. We can start with the questions in the chat. If people want to continue to add questions there, we can, or we can have people like raise their hands too, so we can get to everyone. But we have 2 questions to start. Someone asked, are there low-cost resources to help prepare a trust? If people have anything to add to their questions, they can come off mute too.
So if you do a pooled trust, and the pooled trusts are things that there are 4 organizations in Ohio, and I think there's one in Montgomery County. I think Montgomery, Cleveland, maybe Cincinnati. There's not one in Toledo, but I know there are 4. And so if you're doing a pooled trust, they prepare that for you. And but again, I talked about the downsides to pooled trusts. If you're doing a stable account, that is something that's super easy. You do not need an attorney to do that. That's paperwork that you can walk through. It's just basically an application that you do online. So most people, if you feel like you're proficient enough to get online, and if you're not, then you have somebody that you know and trust that can help you get online and help create the stable account. But and if you're doing another type of trust, you will have to have an attorney prepare that kind of trust. And no, I'm not aware of any resources that would help with that. But the other type of trust, yes. The downside to a pooled trust is I think the money that's left over just goes back into the pool. So it doesn't, yeah. So it's not money that you can give out. Same thing with the stable accounts. They are subject to what we call estate recovery. But the great thing about stable accounts is it's simple paperwork and you should be able to complete it on your own.
Thank you for that. While we're on the stable account, can you put CDs in a stable account?
You can, yeah, like you can put stocks and bonds. I believe you can put CDs in there. As long as, you know, you have to make sure that you are under that $100,000 amount. Because when you go over that, the minute you go over that, it's no longer exempt. So you do have to keep an eye on it. And I should have mentioned that with SSI, it's a little bit different. So it's not strictly just that 967. They have a lot of deductions when they're going through that deeming process to see whether a child's going to qualify if they're in the household of a parent or somebody else. There's a lot more wiggle room. So parents can have more income than you would think because they have some generous earned income deductions. So I always encourage people, you know, it doesn't hurt to apply. They'll figure out whether you're income eligible or not. You very well may be.